I guess I can call this a guide to cross training when you're an ITF Taekwondo person. And what sparked this was a comment that somebody left on one of my old videos on using Taekwondo hate to your advantage. And I'm paraphrasing, he basically says, well, why didn't you just go learn real Taekwondo instead of, asking these people who didn't know Taekwondo for ideas and, because you didn't know anything and all this other stuff. Well, I'll tell you why I went to those people, because the person who I could have went to and gotten the information from as far as learning quote unquote real Taekwondo was not available to me at the time. I didn't even know. I knew of him and I'd met him before, but I didn't know that he was a grandmaster. So I can't go and get what I don't know is available. And when I did eventually find people who, quote unquote, knew the real Taekwondo that I wanted to learn, they pretty much thought that the cross training stuff I'd done was a good idea. Probably because I didn't throw it up in their face and say, well, someone said this and someone said that. So that's not how you cross train. So here is a good way, here's some good tips for if you're an ITF Taekwondo practitioner and you want to cross train. The main thing is you got to take the criticism you're going to get with a grain of salt. Meaning this. People are going to say that some of your movements are wrong because your movements are really Taekwondo and they're not karate. So if you're getting feedback from a Japanese karate practitioner in particular, and maybe some Taekwondo people, they're going to feel like you should not have any sine wave in your moves. So if they say you're doing it wrong, try to ask to see if they're talking about the sine wave. You usually get a hint about that. They'll say something about you bobbing up and down too much. That means it's somebody who doesn't like sine wave. You may even get that from some ITF purists if they've either been around long enough or the people that taught them were around before sine wave was implemented. See, a lot of what you would consider to be real ITF Taekwondo now is just the old Taekwondo but with general choice sine wave put in there. A lot of people don't want to admit that General Choi just made up the sine wave to Koreanize the thing. I should say the exaggeration of the sine wave. Because, in my opinion, real true sine wave is something that happens automatically. It doesn't have to be exaggerated. People will do it. If you ever see how anybody who's trained under me, and I was their primary teacher, how and I don't have that many students that have gotten advanced, really advanced yet, past black belt. But if you see how they move, their sine wave is pretty slight. You'll see it, but it's not super exaggerated. But even that slight sine wave is not enough for some diehard people. All right, so if it's a Japanese karate practitioner, they're not going to like your sine wave. They're going to want your movements to be harder in expression than what you're probably used to. So if they want you to make your movements harder, they want to see more snap in it. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong to learn it that way. I would say that you should learn how to do it the karate way, and then do it the way that you've learned how to do it before, if you didn't learn it from someone who's heavily karate influenced. Now, let's drift over to and the karate people in general will definitely tell you that your kicks are too high. Okay. The whole high kicks don't work in a street fight argument, which is not true. I mean, I can go on about how I've kicked people in the chest in self-defense situations and it worked. And, if you want to use the cage fighting as a barometer for what's real, people do high kicks in the cage. Okay. But don't argue with them. Just know that's where it's coming from. Now, if we want to talk about a practitioner of some of the internal arts, or maybe some people, especially who do Kung Fu or Chinese martial art, they're probably going to tell you that your stances are too high. Now, they have a good point, because doing low stances is just a good way to build up your legs and help you to move better when you go back to a more realistic stance. Don't do like I've been tempted to do and go and break out the Funakoshi book once you make your argument of how Taekwondo is just Korean karate. So, okay, fine. So we should look at how they're doing in karate. Okay, fine. Well, look at how Funakoshi's doing his forms, and he's got the same stance as a modern ITF Taekwondo practitioner. They'll make the argument is, oh, it was because he was old. That's why. No. You don't necessarily need to do real deep stances in a self-defense situation. Okay? The deep stances are good to build your legs, and they're good for a practice tool. And it is good to learn how to fight low so you can get used to going under people. So that's typically the criticism you're going to get from them. They're probably going to say that your moves are also too hard. They may want you to do a softer expression of movement. And if they're really good, especially if it's an internal person, if they're really good, they should be able to show you how, if you're moving too hard, it can be overcome with softness. But what you need to do is add in their soft expression into your expression. And that'll help make your technique more well-rounded, and you'll be able to adapt the softness. And there's a book I have, and I cannot remember the name of it. It was a karate book. It has a little chart similar to the cycle of destruction, where it shows the phenomenon that soft beats hard. Hard beats semi-hard. And semi-hard beats soft. It's something like that. Softness can overcome hardness. Hardness can overcome semi-hard techniques. Semi-hard techniques can overcome softness. So instead of restricting yourself in just one of those three categories, you should learn movements from those three categories. I think you should learn internal expression and external expression. One book I really like is called I think it's called Martial Arts for Dummies, where the author makes the argument that the progression from external martial arts to internal martial arts is not necessarily in the style. It's in the stylist as the person ages and or just gains experience, which means that the longer that you're doing something, you're relying less and less on physical technique, more on mental technique, energy, and for those of you that believe in the spirit, on your spiritual intuition. Me personally, on the spiritual platform, I'm Catholic, so I'm Christian, and that means that I just rely on, I let God guide me as to where I'm supposed to train and who I'm supposed to train with and for how long. And I've noticed that I'm not perfect with that, because I've noticed every time I've tried to go against what deep down inside I knew God was telling me about how it's time to leave here or how you should stay there, something goes wrong. And I end up being set back, or the situation just doesn't work anyway. So let's see. We've talked about karate people, we've talked about kung fu people, and boxers. Usually the main criticism you want to get from boxers is that you're not used to being hit. That may or may not be true. Now you may think that it's true that, oh, I'm not used to being hit. But if you have been in a real fight, or if you've been in more than 3 real fights, honestly, that's all the used to being hit that you need. 3 or more. Like I said in one of my other videos, 3 to 5 fights. If you've had at least 3 fights, your body can handle being hit. I don't care how long ago it's been. If you haven't been hit in decades, there'll probably be a little bit of a freeze or a lag factor, but it is not going to be as much as somebody who has never been hit. You get hit, that adrenaline is going to come back, and it'll kick in and let you know, and let your opponent know, I have picked with the wrong person because this person has felt a punch or a kick before. So if somebody's gone upside your head a few times, that's enough. You don't need to keep taking repeated damage to the head or the body in order to have damages to your internal organs, particularly your brain. So you can just kind of ignore that whole boxing criticism of you're not used to being punched. Because I'm telling you this as someone who has I've done an amateur boxing match before, okay? And I've done full contact in training sparring before. And I've done some real fights before. The real fights were more than enough for me to be used to being hit. Because the bad thing about the boxing glove is when it hits you, you don't feel the cutting edge of the person's knuckles hitting you. All that force from the punch, it's like it bypasses your external blocks and it's really just going straight to your brain and it's going into your organs. That's where you don't want it. You don't want that. It would be actually better if you were being hit barehanded because you know right off that you're being hurt. You feel that pain on the surface, so you ease away from it. Another criticism you're going to get in boxing is about your stance. Probably your stance is too wide. And that can be a good thing. What I recommend is you learn the boxing stance and you learn how to move around and integrate the boxing stance into what you do when you're free sparring. Or learn how to kick from the boxing stance. Now, if you look at some of the older karate books, especially if you look at what Funakoshi's doing, and if you look at what some ITF stylists are doing, they're really they really have a boxer's stance. I mean, it's not like boxing owns that stance. It's really just the, what we call either forward stance or walking stance or front stance, depending on what nomenclature your school uses. It's that narrowed a bit. You want the stance to be a little deeper in forms if you want to go for like a power finishing move, but you want it shorter if you want to go for faster speed moves, or if you're in a situation where you're fighting for points. Now, another criticism you may get from boxers, this actually may probably come from a Jeet Kune Do person, is they're going to say that there are no hooks in Taekwondo. You don't have the hook punch. And you may believe that you don't have the hook punch. And that's only because you haven't gotten to the point of your forms where you have that punch that comes in from the side. And I think some people call it a C punch. A couple of the forms have this punch that comes at the side and is aimed, I'm not going to say where, but someplace along the head. That's really like a hook. So you have that there, you just haven't learned it yet. See, if you're talking about self-defense, a hook is not necessarily the best punch you can throw, because when unskilled or lowly skilled people throw hooks, they're pretty easy to see and pretty easy to block. People like to teach you straight punching because the shortest distance between 2 points in the universe is a straight line. So if you punch somebody with your straight attack punch, it's quicker. What other criticism could you get? Oh, the classic criticism of, oh, you just have your hand down by your waist. A lot of people don't know that the retracting hand is supposed to have something in it. It's also supposed to be, how when people actually fight, a lot of times they grab the person they're going to hit and pull the person in and hit them with the other hand. That's what your retracting hand is for. Okay, you can also use that retracting hand. If somebody grabs your wrist, and then you pull your hand out and punch them at the same time with the other hand, you pull back the retracting hand to your waist while you're simultaneously punching with your attack hand, they're going to tense up. And that tension should be enough to make the punch that you hit them with worse for them. So those are a lot of the criticisms that you're going to get when you cross-train. Take it with a grain of salt. Because despite the criticisms you're going to get some useful information. That is, if you really are about studying the martial arts as a whole, and not just thinking that the style that you chose to represent is the only way to go. And see, something else you want to keep in mind too is if you're thinking about Taekwondo, especially ITF Taekwondo, ITF Taekwondo actually comes from Kung Fu and from karate. There was some cross-training back in the day with karate people in boxing. There was some cross-training back in the day with karate people in judo. So the full-on, fully detailed ITF Taekwondo has judo elements in it. That's where your throws come from. It is a mixed martial art. It has judo elements in it. It has karate elements in it. It's got some Western boxing elements in it. It's actually got some pressure point Kyushu elements in it. You just may not have learned them yet. You've got all that in it, tacked on to the Korean indigenous kicking arts. And really, after a while, when you've been around long enough, you'll realize there really is no style other than the style of one person protecting themselves against another person. So that's your guide to cross training. Just remember, the critiques are people are going to be looking at what you're doing from their standpoint. So take the Jeet Kune Do Bruce Lee advice, absorb what's useful and discard what is not. Peace.